Maya had learned to walk quietly through life. At 28 years old, she moved through her days like someone trying not to disturb the peace, even though peace had never really existed in her world. The small apartment above her parents' garage had become her refuge from a family that had never quite figured out what to do with her. Through the single window that faced the main house, she could see into the kitchen where her mother prepared meals with the same mechanical precision she approached everything else. Her father's chair sat empty most evenings, though she could hear the television playing downstairs where he spent his time. Maya couldn't remember when she first realized she was different from other children. Maybe it was during those early school years when other kids talked excitedly about family trips and birthday parties, while Maya learned to change the subject. Her parents weren't cruel exactly. They fed her, clothed her, sent her to school, and made sure she had what she needed. But love, real love, seemed to be a language they had never learned to speak. Her father owned a construction company that had been passed down through 3 generations. From the time Maya could walk, she heard stories about how important it was to keep the business in the family. The problem was, Maya was supposed to be Mark. Her parents had picked out the name, painted the nursery blue, and planned for a son who would one day take over the company. Instead, they got a quiet little girl who showed more interest in books than building materials. When Maya turned 5, her brother Alex was born, and suddenly the house came alive in ways it never had before. Her parents, who had seemed permanently tired and distant with her, transformed into doting, attentive caregivers. They took hundreds of photos of Alex, celebrated every milestone, and filled conversations with stories about his latest achievements. Maya watched from the sidelines, trying to understand what made Alex so special that he could unlock the love she had spent years searching for. School became Maya's escape. She discovered she was good with numbers, had a talent for organizing information, and found comfort in the predictable world of mathematics. Her teachers praised her work, and for a few hours each day she felt valuable. But even these small victories felt hollow when she brought home report cards full of A's to parents, who glanced at them briefly before returning to discussions about Alex's soccer practice or piano lessons. The pattern continued through high school and college. Maya earned a degree in accounting, graduated with honors, and found a steady job at the local credit union. She hoped that professional success might finally earn her parents' respect, but they seemed to view her achievements as simply what was expected rather than anything worth celebrating. Meanwhile, Alex was praised for making the junior varsity basketball team and passing his driving test. Dating had been another series of disappointments. Maya had really tried to put herself out there. She joined study groups in college, attended work functions, and even let her coworker set her up on a few blind dates. But somehow conversations always felt forced, and second dates were rare. Maya began to wonder if there was something fundamentally wrong with her, some invisible barrier that kept people at a distance. Her coworkers at the credit union were friendly enough, but their friendships seemed to exist only within the walls of the office. They talked about weekend plans and family gatherings that Maya was never invited to join. She told herself it didn't matter, that she preferred quiet evenings at home anyway. But the truth was that the loneliness had become like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. The apartment above the garage had been presented as a practical solution when Maya graduated college. She needed a place to live. Her parents had extra space, and the rent they charged was below market rate. What they didn't mention was that it also kept her conveniently separate from the main house, where family dinners and holiday celebrations continued without her. Maya decorated the small space carefully, choosing warm colors and soft textures that made it feel like home. She filled bookshelves with novels and arranged plants on the windowsills. In the evenings, she would cook simple meals and eat them while reading or watching movies on her laptop. It was a peaceful life, but peace and happiness weren't the same thing. The view from her window became a daily reminder of what she was missing. She could see into other houses on the street, where families gathered around dinner tables and children played in backyards. During summer evenings, she watched neighbors host barbecues and birthday parties, their laughter carrying on the warm air. Maya had stopped wondering why she had never been invited to these gatherings. She had learned to accept that some people were meant to be part of community life, while others were meant to observe from a distance. Work provided structure and purpose, even if it didn't provide connection. Maya was good at her job, helping people understand their finances and plan for the future. Her clients appreciated her patience and attention to detail, and she took pride in helping them achieve their goals. But at the end of the day, she always returned to the quiet apartment, where the silence was both comforting and suffocating. Maya had developed small rituals that made her solitary life bearable. Saturday morning walks through the downtown area, where she could be around people without having to interact. Sunday afternoons at the library, where being alone felt normal. Evening phone calls with her college roommate, who had moved across the country but still checked in occasionally. These small connections helped Maya feel less invisible, even if they couldn't fill the deeper longing for belonging. Her relationship with her family had settled into a polite but distant routine. She attended holiday dinners when invited, sitting quietly, while Alex entertained everyone with stories from his job or his latest romantic relationship. Her parents asked basic questions about her work and health, but conversations never went deeper. Maya had stopped trying to share her thoughts or feelings, having learned that they were met with polite disinterest rather than genuine curiosity. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness itself, but the way it seemed to feed on itself. The longer Maya went without meaningful connections, the more difficult it became to imagine making them. She found herself overthinking every social interaction, analyzing every conversation for signs of rejection or acceptance. This self-consciousness made it even harder to relax and be natural around others, creating a cycle that felt impossible to break. Maya had tried therapy a few years earlier, hoping to understand why relationships felt so difficult. The counselor was kind and professional, but after several sessions, Maya realized that talking about her problems wasn't the same as solving them. Understanding why she felt rejected didn't make the rejection hurt less or help her figure out how to connect with others. She left therapy with more self-awareness but no more hope. Friends from college had gradually drifted away as their lives took different paths. They got married, had children, moved to new cities, and found new friends who fit better with their changing circumstances. Maya watched their lives unfold through social media posts, seeing their happiness from a distance while wondering what it would feel like to be truly chosen by someone. The credit union where Maya worked was small enough that everyone knew each other's business. She listened to her coworkers talk about their families, their weekend plans, their relationship drama, and career ambitions. They included her in these conversations in a general way, but Maya always felt like she was watching a movie rather than participating in real life. Their problems seemed so different from hers. They worried about having too many social obligations while Maya worried about having none. Maya had learned to find small pleasures in her quiet life. She enjoyed cooking elaborate meals just for herself, trying new recipes and taking time to appreciate the flavors. She read voraciously, losing herself in other people's stories since her own felt too empty to examine closely. She tended her small garden of herbs and flowers, finding satisfaction in nurturing something that would grow and thrive under her care. But despite these small joys, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was living life from the outside, watching others experience the connections and belonging she had always craved. She had stopped believing that things would change, that someone would see her as worth choosing, worth loving, worth including. Instead, she had learned to be grateful for the small kindnesses that came her way, and to find meaning in helping others, even if she couldn't find it for herself. Maya's days followed a predictable pattern that provided comfort even as it highlighted her isolation. Morning coffee while watching the sunrise through her window. Work, where she helped others plan their financial futures while her own seemed permanently on hold. Evening walks through the neighborhood, where she could observe the life she wasn't part of. Weekend errands and small adventures that she enjoyed but wished she could share with someone. The upcoming community charity auction represented everything Maya usually avoided. A crowded social event where her isolation would be obvious, where she would spend the evening watching other people connect while she stood on the sidelines. But her supervisor had asked for volunteers, and Maya had found herself saying yes, perhaps because the alternative was another evening alone in her apartment, perhaps. David's house felt like a museum now. Every object held a memory. Every room echoed with laughter that would never return. 6 months after the accident, he still caught himself listening for Rosa's key in the door at the end of the day. Still, turned to share a thought with her before remembering she wasn't there to hear it. The 42-year-old high school history teacher had always been the quiet one in their relationship. Rosa had been the sun around which their social world revolved, organizing dinner parties, maintaining friendships, filling their home with warmth and conversation. Without her, David felt like he was floating in space, untethered from everything. That had once made sense. Their house on Maple Street had been Rosa's pride and joy. She had spent weekends painting walls bright colors, planting flower gardens, and turning every corner into something beautiful. Now the paint was fading, the gardens were overgrown, and David couldn't bring himself to change anything. It felt like erasing her, and he wasn't ready for that kind of letting go. Teaching had always been David's calling, but now he struggled to find purpose in lesson plans and parent conferences. His students, initially understanding about his loss, had begun to sense his emotional absence. The passion he once brought to discussions about historical events had been replaced by a mechanical recitation of facts. His colleagues watched him with concerned eyes, unsure how to help someone who seemed determined to disappear into his own grief. The accident had happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Rosa was driving home from her book club meeting when a drunk driver ran a red light. The doctor said she probably didn't suffer, that it happened too quickly for fear or pain. David was supposed to find comfort in this information, but instead it made him feel cheated out of the chance to say goodbye, to tell her one more time how much she meant to him. In the months since the funeral, David's sister Linda had appointed herself his caretaker and social coordinator. She called every few days to check on him, brought casseroles he didn't eat, and insisted he needed to get back out there before too much time passed. Her intentions were good, but David felt like she was asking him to betray Rosa's memory by pretending to be interested in moving on. The well-meaning friends who had filled their house after the funeral gradually returned to their own lives, leaving David alone with his memories and the silence that had replaced Rosa's voice. Their couple friends felt awkward, including just him in dinner invitations, and David felt awkward being the odd man out at gatherings that reminded him of everything he had lost. David had tried to follow Linda's advice about staying social. He attended faculty parties where he stood in corners nursing a single drink, while his colleagues made polite conversation about the weather and upcoming school events. He accepted invitations to dinner parties where kind hosts seated him next, to recently divorced women who seemed as uncomfortable with the arrangement as he was. The blind dates Linda arranged were disasters of good intentions and bad timing. The women were perfectly nice, intelligent, attractive, accomplished, but David couldn't concentrate on their stories or questions. Part of his mind was always somewhere else, comparing every laugh to Rosa's, every gesture to the way she had moved through the world with such joy and confidence. Sleep had become David's enemy. During the day, he could stay busy enough to avoid thinking too deeply about his loss. But at night, lying in the bed they had shared for 15 years, memories crashed over him like waves. He remembered their first apartment, their wedding day, lazy Sunday mornings when they read the newspaper together and planned their week ahead. David had stopped eating meals at the dining room table where he and Rosa had shared thousands of conversations. Instead, he ate standing at the kitchen counter or in front of the television, trying to avoid the empty chair that seemed to mock his solitude. The house felt too big for one person, but he couldn't imagine living anywhere else because this was where Rosa's presence still felt strongest. Their friends meant well, but their advice often felt like pressure to heal according to someone else's timeline. Rosa wouldn't want you to be alone forever, they said, as if they knew what Rosa would want better than David did. You're still young. You have so much to offer someone, they insisted, not understanding that David didn't want to offer anything to anyone else. He wanted Rosa back, and since that was impossible, he wanted to be left alone with what remained of their life together. The history classroom where David had taught for 12 years had become his refuge from the world's expectations. Students were honest in a way adults weren't. They didn't pretend to understand loss they had never experienced, and they didn't offer empty platitudes about time healing all wounds. But even here, David's grief showed in his shortened patience and lack of enthusiasm for subjects that had once excited him. David's daily routine had shrunk to the basics. He got up, showered, went to work, came home, ate something simple, and went to bed early. Weekends stretched endlessly, filled with household chores he did mechanically and television shows he watched without really seeing. He had stopped reading the books Rosa used to recommend, stopped listening to the music they had enjoyed together, stopped doing most of the things that had once brought him pleasure. The house was full of reminders of the life they had built, together. Rosa's coffee mug still sat in the kitchen cabinet. Her books were still stacked on her nightstand. Her clothes still hung in their shared closet, and David couldn't bring himself to pack them away. Sometimes he would catch a faint trace of her perfume on a sweater or pillow, and the scent would stop him in his tracks, bringing tears he thought he had finished crying. Photography had been David's hobby before Rosa died. He had loved capturing candid moments, Rosa laughing at something on her phone, their cat sleeping in a patch of sunlight, the changing seasons in their garden. But now the camera sat unused in a drawer. The world seemed too gray and empty to be worth documenting, and David couldn't imagine ever wanting to remember these days of grief and loneliness. Linda had suggested grief counseling, support groups, even antidepressants. David had tried the counseling for a few sessions, but talking about his pain to a stranger felt like betraying something sacred between him and Rosa. The support group was full of people further along in their healing journey. People who spoke about moving forward and finding new meaning in ways that made David feel like he was failing at grief. The worst part wasn't the sadness itself, but the way it had changed him into someone he didn't recognize. David had always been introspective, but now he felt completely disconnected from the world around him. Joy seemed like a foreign concept, something other people experienced while he watched from behind glass. Even small pleasures, a good meal, a sunny day, a student's breakthrough moment, felt muted and distant. David's students had begun to notice his change in teaching style. Where he had once encouraged lively debates about historical events, now he stuck to textbook material and discouraged discussion. Where he had once made history come alive with personal anecdotes and passionate explanations, now he delivered information with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. The principal had called David into her office twice to express concern about his performance. She was understanding about his loss, but she had a responsibility to the students who deserved engaged, effective instruction. David promised to do better, but he didn't know how to fake enthusiasm he didn't feel or energy he didn't have. Evenings were the hardest time. This was when he and Rosa had shared their best conversations, when they had planned for the future and laughed about their days. Now David sat in Rosa's favorite chair, surrounded by her books and plants, trying to feel close to her memory, while battling the crushing weight of loneliness. David had started avoiding places where he and Rosa had spent time together. The bookstore, where she had worked part-time, was off limits, as was their favorite restaurant and the park where they had taken evening walks. Even the grocery store felt like navigating a minefield of memories. Every aisle held reminders of meals they had cooked together, brands Rosa had preferred, foods she had been excited to try. Sleep often eluded David, leaving him lying awake, replaying conversations and moments from their marriage. He tortured himself with regrets, times he had been impatient or distracted, opportunities for kindness he had missed, words of love he should have said more often. Grief had a way of magnifying every imperfection, while making their happiness seem like something that had happened to someone else. The charity auction Linda insisted he attend represented everything David wanted to avoid: a crowded social event where his sadness would be obvious, where well-meaning acquaintances would ask how he was doing with expressions of pity he found unbearable. But Rosa had bought the table the year before, back when they had planned to attend together, and Linda insisted that honoring the commitment would be good for him. As David prepared for the evening, choosing clothes that Rosa had once complimented, and practicing the polite responses he would need to get through conversations about his loss, he felt the familiar weight of dreading social interaction. He was a man, learning to exist without the Riverside Community Center looked different at night, transformed from a place where seniors did water aerobics and children took art classes into an elegant venue for the annual charity auction. Maya arrived early, as volunteers were expected, to do, and immediately felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with social events. The registration table had been set up near the entrance, draped with white tablecloths and decorated with small arrangements of fall flowers. Maya arranged the name tags alphabetically, checked that she had enough pens, and reviewed the seating chart one more time. Organizing details helped calm her nerves and gave her something to focus on besides the growing crowd of well-dressed donors streaming through the doors. Maya had chosen her outfit carefully, a simple navy dress that wouldn't draw attention, but looked appropriate for the occasion. She had spent 20 minutes deciding between small pearl earrings and simple silver studs, then laughed at herself for caring so much about details that no one would notice. But looking professional helped her feel more confident, like she belonged behind the registration table even if she didn't belong anywhere else. The other volunteers were chatty and energetic, the kind of people who seemed to know everyone and genuinely enjoyed events like this. Maya smiled politely at their jokes and nodded along with their conversations, but she felt like she was watching a play rather than participating in real life. These were the people who got invited to parties, who had full social calendars, who never worried about eating dinner alone. As the evening progressed, Maya fell into a rhythm of checking in guests, directing them to their tables, and answering questions about the auction items. The work suited her. It was helpful and necessary, but it also kept her busy enough that she didn't have to make extended small talk or worry about looking lonely. She was good at this kind of behind-the-scenes support, making things run smoothly while staying in the background. Around 7:30, when Maya thought the last-minute arrivals were finished, a man approached her table looking genuinely distressed. He fumbled with a crumpled ticket and kept checking his watch, clearly uncomfortable with being late. Maya noticed his kind eyes and the way his suit looked like it hadn't been worn in a while, hanging loose on his frame as if he had lost weight recently. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor that spoke of nerves or grief. "I know I'm late. The name is David Chen and I have no idea where I'm supposed to sit. I'm really not good at these things." Something in his voice made Maya look up from the registration list. Really look at him. There was a sadness in his eyes. That felt familiar, a kind of careful distance that reminded her of her own approach to social situations. But there was also something gentle about him, a politeness that seemed genuine rather than practiced. "Don't worry at all," Maya said softly, finding his name on the list. "David Chen, table 12. You're actually perfectly on time there, just starting the welcome remarks." She handed him his name tag and auction paddle, noticing how his hands shook slightly. "The coffee station is right over there and the restrooms are down that hallway if you need a moment to collect yourself." "Thank you," David said, and Maya could tell he meant it in a way that went beyond simple politeness. "I haven't been to one of these events in a while. I'm not sure I remember how to do this anymore. Honestly?" Maya leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Neither do I. But I found that the coffee isn't terrible, and if you get overwhelmed, you can always step outside for some air. No one really pays attention to whether you're bidding on anything. They're usually too busy with their own conversations." David smiled for the first time that evening, a small expression that transformed his face completely. "You're very kind. Most people just assume everyone loves these events." "Most people assume a lot of things," Maya replied, then blushed at her own honesty. She usually kept her observations about social situations to herself, but something about David's genuine nervousness made her want to offer real comfort, rather than empty platitudes. As David walked toward his table, Maya found herself watching him navigate the crowded room. He moved carefully, like someone afraid of bumping into conversations he wasn't prepared to join. She recognized the posture of someone trying to look comfortable while feeling completely out of place, and she felt an unexpected kinship with this sad stranger. Throughout the evening, Maya noticed David from her position at the registration table. He sat quietly at his assigned table, nodding politely when the other guest tried to include him in conversation but clearly struggling to engage. During the auction, he raised his paddle only once, bidding on a gift certificate to a bookstore that no one else seemed interested in. Maya found herself hoping he would win it. Something about the way he studied the description suggested he would actually use and appreciate the prize. When the microphone system failed during the main presentation, Maya quickly located the backup equipment and had it working within minutes. She noticed David watching her handle the minor crisis with calm efficiency, and when their eyes met across the room, he gave her a small nod of appreciation that made her feel genuinely useful, rather than just invisible. The evening wound down, slowly with guests lingering over coffee and dessert, while volunteers began the cleanup process. Maya was organizing leftover auction materials when David appeared beside the registration table, looking like he was working up the courage to say something. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you again for your help earlier, and I noticed how quickly you handled the microphone situation. You really saved the evening." "Oh, that was nothing," Maya replied, deflecting the compliment out of habit. "I just knew where they kept the backup equipment. Anyone could have done it, but you did do it," David said gently. "And you did it without making a big show of it or waiting for someone else to take charge. That's not nothing. That's competence and kindness." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks at the unexpected praise. Most people didn't notice her contributions, and when they did, they usually took them for granted. Having someone acknowledge her efforts felt strange and wonderful. "Would you like help carrying those things to your car?" David asked, gesturing to the boxes of materials Maya was organizing. "It looks like quite a load." Maya's instinct was to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own as she always did. But something about David's offer felt different from empty politeness. He seemed to genuinely want to help, and he looked like he could use something useful to do with his nervous energy. "That would be very nice. Thank you," Maya heard herself saying, and then wondered at her own boldness in accepting help from a virtual stranger. As they walked through the parking lot carrying boxes of auction materials under the October stars, Maya and David began to talk in a way that felt surprisingly natural. They discovered they both worked in education, Maya as a financial literacy instructor at the Adult Learning Center on weekends, David as a high school history teacher during the week. "I love working with adult students," Maya said as they loaded the materials into her car. "They're there because they want to be, because they're trying to improve their lives or learn something new. It's different from teaching kids who might not want to be in the classroom." "I used to feel that way about my high school students," David replied, then paused as if he had said more than he intended. "I mean, I still do. It's just been a challenging year." Maya sensed there was more to the story, but didn't push. She understood about challenging years and the way they could drain the joy out of things that once felt meaningful. Instead, she talked about the satisfaction of helping someone understand budgeting for the first time, or watching a student master basic computer skills that would help them find better employment. "You must be a good teacher," David said as they finished loading the car. "You explained the auction process so clearly earlier, and you were so patient with that elderly gentleman who couldn't understand the bidding system. I just remember what it feels like to be confused about something everyone else seems to understand," Maya replied. "It's not fun, so I try to explain things in a way that doesn't make people feel stupid for asking questions." They stood by Maya's car in the cool night air, both reluctant to end a conversation that felt easier and more genuine than either had experienced in months. The parking lot was nearly empty now, and they could hear the distant sound of volunteers finishing the cleanup inside the community center. "This might sound forward," David said, running a hand through his hair nervously. "But would you like to get coffee sometime? I mean, if you drink coffee, or tea, or whatever you prefer. I enjoyed talking with you tonight, and I don't get to have many conversations about work that don't involve complaints about teenagers or budget cuts." Maya's first instinct was to assume he was asking out of pity or politeness, that he had noticed her working alone and felt sorry for her. But looking at David's face in the parking lot lights, she saw genuine interest rather than charity, authentic nervousness rather than practiced charm. "I would like that," Maya said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. I enjoy talking about teaching too, and I don't get many opportunities either. Their first coffee meeting took place on a Saturday morning at a small cafe downtown that neither had been to before, neutral territory that wouldn't hold memories for either of them. Maya arrived a few minutes early and chose a corner table, where they could talk without being overheard, then immediately worried she was being presumptuous about wanting privacy for their conversation. David appeared in the doorway right on time, looking around uncertainly until he spotted Maya's wave. He had changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on a casual button-down shirt and jeans that felt appropriate, but not too formal. As he walked toward her table, he felt the same nervous energy he remembered from first dates in college, mixed with a guilt he couldn't quite shake about moving forward with any kind of social connection. "I'm glad you picked this place," David said as he sat down across from Maya. "I've driven by it dozens of times but never stopped in. It seems like the kind of place where you could spend hours reading." "That's exactly what I thought," Maya replied, pleased that he had noticed the comfortable chairs and good lighting. "I love coffee shops that feel like they're designed for lingering rather than rushing through." They ordered their drinks, Maya choosing tea instead of coffee, David getting a simple black coffee, and settled into conversation that picked up where they had left off in the parking lot. Without the distraction of the charity auction, they had more space to really talk, to ask questions and share stories about their work and their lives. Maya found herself telling David about her weekend teaching at the Adult Learning Center, about the satisfaction of helping people who had been told they were bad with numbers, discovered they could understand financial concepts when they were explained clearly. David listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about her teaching methods and sharing his own experiences with students who struggled with traditional classroom approaches. "I think you understand something important about learning," David said, stirring sugar into his second cup of coffee. "That people aren't stupid just because they don't know something yet. I see teachers all the time who get frustrated with students for not immediately grasping concepts, as if confusion were a character flaw." "Exactly," Maya said, feeling understood in a way that was both novel and wonderful. "Everyone learns differently, and everyone comes to learning with different experiences. My students have often been told they're not smart enough for higher education or better jobs. Part of my job is proving that's not true." As weeks passed, Maya and David began meeting regularly for coffee, then for walks in the park, then for simple dinners at quiet restaurants where they could continue conversations that never seemed to run out of substance. They discovered they both preferred small gatherings to large parties, both found comfort in routine, and both had learned to find satisfaction in helping others, even when their own lives felt uncertain. David began to look forward to their meetings, in a way that surprised him. For months he had felt like he was going through the motions of living without actually experiencing joy or anticipation. But planning to see Maya, thinking of stories to share with her and looking forward to her insights about his work, brought a lightness to his days that he had thought was gone forever. Maya, meanwhile, was experiencing something entirely new, the pleasure of being consistently chosen. David called when he said he would, showed up on time, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. She began to relax her careful guard, sharing more personal details about her family situation and her long experience of feeling invisible to the people who were supposed to love her. "I think I've spent so much time trying not to be a burden that I forgot how to let people care about me," Maya admitted during one of their evening walks through the downtown area. "It's easier to expect nothing than to hope for something and be disappointed." "I understand that," David said quietly. "After Rosa died, I convinced myself that wanting connection was somehow betraying her memory. It felt safer to just turn off that part of myself than to risk feeling loss again." It was the first time David had spoken his late wife's name aloud to Maya, and she felt the significance of the moment. She didn't offer empty condolences or try to change the subject. Instead, she simply nodded and continued walking beside him, letting him know through her presence that his grief was welcome in their friendship. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on small acts of kindness and consideration rather than grand gestures or passionate declarations. David brought Maya books he thought she would enjoy. Maya remembered David's preference for tea over coffee in the afternoons and started keeping a selection at her apartment, They developed inside jokes about their students and created rituals around their regular meetings that made both feel they had something special to protect. The reactions from their respective families and friends ranged from puzzled to openly disapproving. Maya's parents, who had barely acknowledged her existence for years, suddenly had strong opinions about her settling for a widower who was obviously still in love with a dead woman. Her mother worried aloud that Maya was being used as the emotional crutch, while her father questioned whether David would ever truly commit to someone new. "You could do better," her mother said during one of their rare phone conversations. "You're still young, Maya. Why waste time with someone who's carrying so much baggage?" Maya wanted to point out that her parents had never shown any interest in her romantic life before, had never seemed to care whether she did better or worse in relationships. But she had learned not to expect consistency from people who had always treated her as an afterthought. David's friends and colleagues were more diplomatically concerned but equally skeptical. They had expected him to eventually find someone, more like Rosa, outgoing, socially confident, the type of person who would help him reconnect with their shared social circle. Linda, his sister, tried to be supportive but couldn't hide her confusion about David's attraction to someone so different from his late wife. "She seems very nice," Linda said carefully after meeting Maya for the first time at a family dinner. "But she's so quiet. I worry that she's not going to challenge you to get back out there to start living fully again." "Maybe I don't want to be challenged right now," David replied, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Maybe what I need is someone who accepts me as I am, not someone trying to fix me or push me to be different." The criticism from others only served to strengthen Maya and David's bond. They began to realize that their connection was precious, partly because it was theirs alone, not dependent on anyone else's approval or understanding. They were creating something new together, not trying to recreate past relationships or meet external expectations about what their partnership should look like. Maya discovered that being with David brought out aspects of her personality that had been dormant for years. She found herself expressing opinions more confidently, suggesting activities they might enjoy together, even occasionally being playfully sarcastic in a way that made David laugh. With someone who genuinely wanted to know her thoughts, she became more thoughtful about articulating them. David, meanwhile, found that Maya's acceptance of his grief allowed him to begin processing it differently. She never tried to cheer him up or distract him from sad memories, but her steady presence made it possible for him to remember Rosa with gratitude rather than only with pain. Maya's patience with his emotional process gave him space to heal, without pressure or timelines. "I was afraid that caring about someone new meant forgetting Rosa," David told Maya one evening as they sat in his backyard garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "But being with you has helped me remember her more clearly, without the grief overwhelming everything else." "Love isn't a limited resource," Maya replied softly. "Having room in your heart for new feelings doesn't diminish what you felt before. It just means your heart is bigger than you thought." As autumn turned to winter, Maya and David's relationship settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and nourishing rather than exciting in ways that might burn out quickly. They spent Saturday mornings grocery shopping together, cooking simple meals that they ate while discussing books they were reading or problems they were solving at work. They took evening walks regardless of weather, bundling up in scarves and coats to continue conversations under streetlights. Their physical relationship developed slowly, built on growing trust and genuine affection rather than passionate urgency. Hand-holding during walks, brief hugs goodbye, gentle kisses that spoke of tenderness rather than desperation. Both had learned that intimacy built gradually was more likely to last than connection based primarily on attraction or excitement. Maya's apartment above her parents' garage became their primary gathering place, offering privacy and the comfort of space that was entirely hers. David loved the way Maya had decorated the small rooms, creating warmth and beauty on a limited budget through careful choices and thoughtful arrangements. The space reflected Maya's personality in ways that made David feel he was seeing her more clearly than he could anywhere else. "I've never brought anyone here before," Maya admitted one Sunday. Planning a wedding had never been something Maya dreamed about, but with David, even the practical decisions felt meaningful rather than overwhelming. They chose to keep everything simple and intimate, focusing on what mattered most to them rather than what was expected or impressive. The ceremony would take place in David's backyard garden on a Saturday morning in late April, when the spring flowers Rosa had planted years earlier would be in full bloom. Maya loved the idea of being married surrounded by living reminders of David's past love, seeing it as a blessing rather than a burden. The roses and tulips and flowering trees would be their wedding decorations, nature providing beauty that no florist could improve upon. Maya found her wedding dress at a small boutique downtown, choosing a simple knee-length dress in soft blue rather than traditional white. It had 3/4 sleeves and a modest neckline that made her feel elegant, without trying to be someone she wasn't. When David saw her in it for the first time on their wedding morning, his eyes filled with tears of pure joy. "You're beautiful," he said simply, taking her hands and kissing her forehead gently. "Not because of the dress, though, it's perfect. You're beautiful, Maya, inside and out." The guest list was deliberately small, just 15 people who mattered most to them. Linda and her family represented David's side, along with 2 colleagues from school who had become genuine friends during his healing process. Maya's side included her supervisor from the credit union, her favorite co-teacher from the Adult Learning Center, and surprisingly, her brother Alex, who had driven 3 hours to attend after their parents declined the invitation. "I'm sorry, they're not here," Alex said to Maya as he helped her arrange the simple bouquet of garden flowers she had picked that morning. "They don't understand what they're missing, but I wanted to be here. I wanted to see you this happy." Maya hugged her brother tightly, grateful for his presence and his words. She had stopped expecting her parents to show up for important moments in her life, but having Alex there felt like a gift she hadn't dared to hope for. The ceremony was officiated by James, David's colleague and friend, who had gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion. He had known both David and Rosa, and Maya had worried initially that his presence might feel awkward. Instead, James created a ceremony that honored David's past while celebrating his future, speaking about different kinds of love and the courage it takes to open your heart again after loss. "Maya and David," James said as the small group gathered in a circle under the apple tree, "have found in each other something precious and rare: acceptance without conditions, love without timelines, partnership built on who they really are rather than who they think they should be." Maya's hands shook slightly as she and David exchanged the vows they had written for each other, but her voice was steady as she spoke from her heart. "David, you taught me that being chosen isn't about being perfect or exciting or different from who I am. You chose my quiet nature, my careful ways, my ordinary dreams, and made me understand that those things aren't flaws to apologize for. You saw me when I had convinced myself I was invisible, and you loved me not despite my ordinariness, but because of the particular way I move through the world." David's vows were equally personal and honest, his voice breaking slightly with emotion as he spoke. "Maya, you gave me permission to grieve and heal at the same time, to honor my past while building our future. You never tried to replace what I had lost or compete with memories. Instead, you showed me that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies. You are my present and my future, exactly as you are, exactly as you've always been." When James pronounced them married, their small gathering erupted in applause and tears. Linda hugged Maya warmly, whispering, "Welcome to the family," with genuine affection. Alex shook David's hand firmly, telling him he was lucky to have Maya and that he better take good care of her. The reception was held right there in the garden, with folding tables covered in white tablecloths and centerpieces made from flowers Maya and David had picked together that morning. Maya's co-worker from the credit union had insisted on making the wedding cake, a simple 3-layer vanilla cake with cream cheese frosting and fresh strawberries from the farmer's market. The food was simple but delicious: sandwiches from Maya's favorite deli, a fruit salad that Linda had prepared, homemade cookies that James's wife had contributed. Nobody missed the elaborate catering or fancy reception hall. The conversation flowed easily, with guests sharing stories about Maya and David and offering toasts that were heartfelt rather than polished. "I've worked with Maya for 4 years," her supervisor said during the informal toast session, "and I've watched her help hundreds of people understand their finances and plan for better futures. But I've never seen her as happy as she's been these past few months. David, you brought out a side of Maya that was always there but needed someone special to see it." As the afternoon wore on and guests began to leave, Maya and David found themselves alone in the garden where they had just promised to love each other for the rest of their lives. The spring air was warm and sweet with the scent of blooming flowers, and Maya felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. "How does it feel to be married?" David asked, pulling Maya close as they swayed gently to music playing from the small speaker they had used during the ceremony. "It feels right," Maya said simply. "Like something I didn't know I was waiting for, but now that it's here, I can't imagine it being any different." Their honeymoon was a long weekend at a small bed and breakfast 2 hours north, chosen because it was quiet and surrounded by hiking trails rather than because it was exotic or impressive. They spent their days walking through forests and reading on the wide front porch, talking about their hopes for their marriage and their dreams for the future. "I want our home to be a place where people feel welcome," Maya said as they sat on the porch swing, watching hummingbirds visit the feeder hanging nearby. "Not necessarily loud or constantly busy, but safe. A place where quiet people can feel comfortable." "I love that idea," David replied. "Rosa used to say that the best homes are the ones where you can be yourself completely, where you don't have to perform or pretend to be more interesting than you are." When they returned from their honeymoon, Maya officially moved into David's house on Maple Street, bringing her books and plants and small treasures from the apartment above her parents' garage. She was nervous about living in a space that held so many memories of Rosa, but David helped her understand that she wasn't erasing the past. She was adding to the story the house would tell. Maya set up her desk in the spare bedroom that would become her home office, arranging her financial planning materials and adult education resources on the bookshelves Rosa had installed years earlier. She planted new herbs in the kitchen garden, choosing varieties that would complement the existing perennials while adding her own touch to the landscape. The house began to reflect both of their personalities, David's love of history books and classical music blending with Maya's practical approach to organization and her talent for creating cozy spaces. They painted the living room a warm gold that made both feel peaceful, and Maya convinced David to hang some of the photographs he had taken before Rosa's death, bringing his artistic eye back into their shared environment. Their marriage settled into rhythms that felt sustainable and nourishing. Saturday morning grocery shopping became a cherished ritual, with Maya making lists organized by store layout, while David suggested new recipes they might try together. Sunday afternoons were for reading, each with their own book but sharing the same couch, feet touching while they turned pages in comfortable silence. Maya's work at the Adult Learning Center expanded as word spread about her patient teaching style and practical approach to financial literacy. She began offering evening classes for people who worked during the day, and David often helped by providing childcare for students who couldn't afford babysitters. Their home became an unofficial resource center, with Maya meeting students for one-on-one tutoring sessions at the kitchen table, where she had learned to feel completely at ease. David's teaching improved as his personal life stabilized and healed. His passion for history returned, and his students began to respond to renewed energy in his lessons. The principal, who had worried about his performance after Rosa's death, now praised his innovative approaches to making historical events relevant to modern teenagers. "Marriage suits you," his colleague James observed one afternoon as they supervised study hall together. "You seem more like yourself than you have in years." "Maya helps me remember who I am," David replied simply. "Not who I was before Rosa died, and not who I think I should be now. Just who I actually am, underneath all the grief and expectations." Their first year of marriage brought challenges that tested their foundation, but ultimately strengthened their bond. Maya's parents, who had ignored the wedding invitation, suddenly decided they wanted to be involved in her life now that she was married to someone with a house and a stable job. Their attempts to establish a relationship felt manipulative rather than genuine, and Maya had to learn to set boundaries with people who had never respected her autonomy.